And I'm going to start with actually a children's book and invite you to go on a journey with me. And the book is part of a series that comes in a box that says, What You Do Matters. And there are 3 books in the series. One of them is called What Do You Do with a Problem? One is called What Do You Do with an Idea? And the one that I'm going to read to you today, a very, very short children's book, is called What Do You Do with a Chance? And again, the books were written for children, but I really think that they are written for adults for such a time as this. So you can settle in, and I'm going to read to you What Do You Do with a Chance? One day I got a chance. It just seemed to show up. It acted like it knew me, as if it wanted something. I didn't know why it was here. What do you do with a chance? I wonder. It fluttered around me. It brushed up against me. It circled me as if it wanted me to grab it. And I started to reach for it, but I was unsure. And so it flew away. I thought about it a lot. I wish I had taken my chance. I realized I had wanted it, but I still didn't know if I had the courage. When another chance came around, I wasn't so sure, but I decided to try. I went to reach for it, but I missed and fell. I was embarrassed. I felt foolish. It seemed like everyone was looking at me, and I decided that I never wanted to feel this way again. So after that, whenever a chance came along, I ignored it. And the more I ignored them, the less they came around. Until one day, I noticed that I hadn't seen a chance in quite a while. It was as if they had all disappeared, and I started to worry, what if I don't get another chance? I know I acted like I didn't care, but the truth was I did. I still wanted to take a chance, but I was afraid. And I wasn't sure if I'd ever be brave enough. And then I thought, maybe I don't have to be brave all the time. Maybe I just need to be brave for a little while at the right time. I realized it was up to me. I promised myself that if I ever got another chance, I wasn't going to hold back. If I got another chance, I was going to be ready. And then one seemingly ordinary day, I saw something shining far off in the distance. Is it possible? I hoped. Could this be my chance? I had to find out. I ran as hard and as fast as I could. I don't know how to explain it, but the second I let go of my fears, I was full of excitement. It wasn't that I was no longer afraid, but now my excitement was bigger than my fear. As the closer I got, I could see that this was a really huge chance. But this time I was ready. And as I came by, I reached out and grabbed it. I held on with all my might. It felt so good to soar, to fly, to be free. I now see that when I hold back, I miss out. And I don't want to miss out. There's just so much I want to see and do and discover. So what do you do with a chance? You take it. Because it might be the start of something incredible. So I wanted to start with this book because I believe that the church has been given an extraordinary chance. And it's a chance that we don't get very often. I pray to God that we're never given this chance again to pause everything, to step out of our buildings, to step aside from the busyness of our church calendars. And I believe with my whole heart that God can use this chance in really powerful and profound ways if we try to take full advantage of this space to literally have been given. So I recognize that some of us are already in our buildings. Some of us may have fully emerged. Some of us are planning on how to do that safely. But how is it that we don't run back and just simply open up the doors and assume that everything is going to be the same, or just that we're going to repeat everything that we were doing? But how is it that we can really fully take advantage of this chance? It was Thursday, March 12th, when our mayor announced restrictions that would prevent our congregation from gathering on Sunday, along with all of you. At the time, our church had recently received a gift to install a camera in our sanctuary, with hopes of being able to live stream by Easter before the pandemic was on the horizon. On that Sunday morning, March 15th, I showed up in the sanctuary with our minister of discipleship, our director of music, a candidate for ordained ministry, and a reporter from the Washington Post. I didn't even know that we needed a tripod at the time. And so we placed a person's cell phone on top of a music stand that was propped up on a stack of hymnals. And when the clock struck 11, we touched the button to go live. And we watched as the Holy Spirit showed up in a way that was so palpable that I pray it's a day I never, ever forget. There were no committee meetings to discern when or how to stop. And there were no committee meetings to discern how to start live streaming or how to build a virtual campus. There were no voices saying it was impossible to make that transition so quickly. There was simply the spirit of yes that did what we knew what we had to do in that moment. If people were to be gathered and fed on the third Sunday of Lent. And then when worship ended, we experienced wonder and delight as we scrolled through the comments for the first time before regrouping in the conference room in order to plan our next steps. We then started to ask a series of questions. What went well today? What needs to be tweaked, eliminated, or added to make worship even better next week? And how can we make sure that our people feel connected throughout this upcoming week? We pulled out a write-on wipe-off board. We divided it into 6 columns for every single remaining day of the week. And we made sure that there was an opportunity on each of the days to make sure that no one would feel alone. We imagined an evening check-in every night. We offered story time and show and tell for our children. And a few weeks later, morning prayer was added, a group that continues to meet and grow, gathering for prayer right now 5 mornings a week. In 72 hours, just 72 hours, we've been forced to pause most of our church's ministries, reimagine the ministries that were really needed for this time, and experiment wildly, while also instituting a method of critical evaluation immediately. But why isn't that spirit of yes within us all the time? And not just at the start or throughout a pandemic. I'll be the first to name that the last 14 months have been extraordinarily challenging for me. A season that has tested me physically, emotionally, spiritually, and professionally. No doubt some of us who are on this call are grieving the loss of someone dear to us to COVID-19. Others of us are working through lingering symptoms after being diagnosed with COVID. Several of us may be struggling to make ends meet as we've been unemployed or underemployed. And I pray that we never, ever have to experience a season like this one again. And as I said a few moments ago, I believe that the pandemic has presented the church with a once-in-a-lifetime opportunity to receive a clean slate, a fresh start, as we're forced to let go and reimagine almost everything. Experiment wildly, take risks, and adapt quickly to the changing circumstances around us as we keep asking the question, what do people really need right now? Scripture reminds us how God created out of chaos, how God does God's best work in chaos. And Parker Palmer writes how chaos is the precondition to creativity. And any organization or any individual that doesn't have an arena of creative chaos is already half dead. So how might we embrace this chaotic season as a gift that will continue to unleash wild creativity? So there are two images that regularly remind me how we can take nothing for granted. And the first image is from a newsletter from Mount Vernon Place that was published on February the 1st of 1960. And it proudly boasts that our church was the largest church in the Northeastern jurisdiction. And then it compares our statistics with other congregations in the annual conference. You'll see Mount Vernon, Metropolitan, Hyattsville, Woodside, which is now part of Silver Spring, Bethesda, Foundry, Chevy Chase, and Congress Heights. Those were the largest churches in that order in our annual conference at the time. MVP had a membership of 4,541. We were nearly double the size of the next church, and it's still unclear what that next number means, the one that says 1890, when it says church school on roll. We're not sure if that was our average worship attendance or the number of people on the Sunday school roster, but we do know that our average Sunday school attendance was 804. And the second document is a snapshot of minutes that were taken from a meeting just 45 years later. It was July 17th of 2005 when we had a church conference, and every member of our church was invited to show up and vote on whether or not to sell a significant portion of our property and have it redeveloped. 24 people showed up that night. 24 out of the just 50 or so active members of our congregation. Our average worship attendance in 2006 was 49 people. And it took just 45 years for our church to transition from being the largest congregation in the jurisdiction to one that was within a few years of closing. Where will your church be in 2066? 45 years from now. Will you be a fraction of what you are now? Will you be healthy, growing, flourishing? Or will you be what's forecast that 100,000 of our nation's 384,000 churches are likely not to make it beyond the next 5 years? So let me tell you a little bit more about Mount Vernon Place. And I know some of you have heard this story before, so just bear with me a little bit. So many of you know that in 1844, there was a split in the Methodist Episcopal Church over the issue of slavery. There was a man, Bishop Andrews, who acquired slaves through marriage. And at the 1844 General Conference, the church said, you cannot continue to serve in the episcopacy and hold slaves. The church split into two fractions, whichever you way want to say it. And the Methodist Episcopal Church South began. In 1850, 50 people came together to form Mount Vernon Place Methodist Episcopal Church South as what would be the representative church for the Southern denomination. The church continued to rapidly grow. It was standing room only for significant years. These pictures were taken on an Easter Sunday, where you see that there's not an inch of space left on the stairs or the sidewalks as people are eager to come inside. There was no room on the inside as well. The picture on the right was a musical offering at Christmas one year, where you see 100 or so people of all ages singing or playing the bells, participating in worship, and a whole lot of other white racists gathered in order to participate in worship that day. This is a document that I found up in our archives that is priceless to me, with the coffee stain and all, that shows a little bit of our history. So we started with the 50 people in 1850. We grew to almost 200 in the first 12 years of our life. The Civil War then started. We then went back to 50 people. The war ended. We started to grow until we reached our height in 1960 of 4,541 members. The next 6 years, there was either a significant push to clean the rolls, or there was massive exodus, as we went from 4,541 members to 3,000, just over 3,000 in the next 6 years. And then we continued this very deep and steep decline. When I showed up in 2005, this is what the outside of our building looked like. We are in a community where there are significant numbers of people who experience homelessness, and the congregation had gotten tired of people sleeping on the steps. And so the easiest way to handle that situation was to install gates. The gates on the right were right on Massachusetts Avenue, where hundreds, if not thousands, of people pass by foot or car every single day. I'm not even sure if we knew where the keys were. They were never open. Those gates, that barrier remained like that all the time. The other gates were open on Sunday morning. So it was incredibly hard to even discern or distinguish, is this church really still open, or is it closed? And if it is open, is it open to me? Our key leaders were, we were 50 people with an average age of 82. Our key leaders were all in their 90s. Thelma, the woman on the left, was our lay leader at 90. Mabel's the woman in the middle. She was our staff parish relations committee chairperson at 97. Lois was our finance chair at 90. Ruth was a council chairperson, and Howard was our key usher at 98. If any of you follow me on Facebook or have been around me, you know that I often say that I have the best job in Washington. It's because of what Mabel, the woman in the middle, taught me. She was 97 when I first met her as our staff parish relations committee, and she ended the meeting that night reminding me, or telling me, that Mount Vernon Place was in the center of Washington. Washington needed Mount Vernon Place, and Mount Vernon Place needed me. And then she said, "Don't you ever forget you have the best job in Washington." I thought she was lying for 2 years, and then I realized that she was indeed right, and I'm grateful that she never let me forget that. As I indicated in that earlier picture of minutes, the congregation was able to redevelop property in 2005. And so we were able to sell these buildings and then have a developer build a 12-story building that we then entered into a partnership with Wesley Seminary. I will be quick to say that not many congregations have the opportunity that we were given, and I'll name that outright. But I do believe that all of us can let go of things, and that we all have that opportunity to both let go of things. I also believe that no matter where we are, we have an opportunity to develop partnerships with businesses or with other organizations in our community that can help us do new things and dream new things. And those decisions are what have led to significant new life over the last 15 or so years. Today, we worship, it's hard. Last February, our average worship attendance was 142. Of those people, 95% have come in the last 14 or so years. So it's almost an entirely new congregation that has emerged since the congregation made that decision. So There's a new, well, it's a few years now, but in his book, Creativity Inc., Ed Catmull, who is the president of Pixar Animation and Disney Animation, writes, people want to hang on to things that work, to stories that work, methods that work, strategies that work. You figure something out and it works, and so you keep on doing it. This is what an organization that is committed to learning does, and so we become successful, and our approaches are reinforced, and we become even more resistant to change. And this is what I found when I first got here. We still had a Ruston couples class, which was named for the pastor that was here between 1935 and 1950. It once had over 150 people in it, and that class still had their own room, their own gathering time on Sunday mornings, and their own checkbook. We had a theater group that was performing down below our sanctuary. Historically, everyone in the theater group was a member of our church, and it brought a lot of people into our community, but none of the people who were performing were part of our community anymore. And we were still serving dinner every single Wednesday night, even though just 10 or so people had showed up. So these things were things that had been so vital and life-giving in the past, but we hadn't stopped to ask, are they still making a difference? Are they still helping us reach new people and be the church that we're called to be? Going back to Creativity Inc., Disney's top grossing film is Snow White and the Seven Dwarfs, which I didn't realize until I read that book. It has amassed an adjusted gross income of $943 million. Pinocchio, Sleeping Beauty, 101 Dalmatians, and Mary Poppins are also on the list of the top 10 revenue producing films for the company. But imagine if Disney would have just stopped there, would have just said, these movies are making a lot of money, and so we're going to stop. And then we would have missed out on all of the art of animation that's continued, that's produced films like Up or Finding Nemo or Toy Story. They're films that not only capture a child's attention, but also have the capacity to grab our hearts as adults as well. So what's working in your church? What's working? And how do you know it's working? What does it mean for something to be working? Is it working if the same two people have been keeping it going for the last 10 years? With no one else really helping them or paying attention? Is it working if 25 people are participating in something that has little to do with what your overall mission or vision is? Is it working if the church council or administrative board has eliminated it from the budget, only to be picked up and paid for by one family? How do we know what works? And more importantly, how do we know that something has stopped working? One of the most painful stories at Mount Vernon Place is about a ministry called Hope for All. And the picture on the right is a picture that I took one day on an incredibly cold January or February morning when I grabbed a colleague to go outside and to see if indeed there were people sleeping on our porch and if they had made it through the night because it was that cold. When I pulled back the tarp that's in front of you, what I realized that someone had made a makeshift home on our front porch. Their medication was there, prescription medication, all of their food was there, and then suitcases with clothing was there. And for decades, as I said, MVP has had significant numbers of people experiencing homelessness, or we call them unhoused neighbors, all around us, as well as partnerships in order to discern what role we could play. But when we saw this, we decided to begin an experiment. And the experiment started with about 8 people who gathered around a large table with 6 of church members who wanted to partner and see what we could do to make a difference. So I should say before that, after this happened, our trustees made a decision to no longer allow sleeping on the porch because of the danger. And we had someone come in and help us to see that what we were doing, we imagined it was hospitality, but no one provides hospitality and says sleep right on the porch, but don't come inside. So we made this decision that we would no longer allow people to sleep on the porch, but that what we would do was to try to walk with the people who were sleeping on our porch, our immediate residents, to see if we could lead them out of homelessness. And so the experiment was the 8 or so people who were sleeping on the porches and about 6 Mount Vernon Place members who showed up. And what we started to do was ask questions. What is it? What are some of the barriers that you're facing? What is it that's preventing you from getting a job? What is it that's preventing you from moving into housing? And what we heard is that people wanted to go to a job placement program, but that they didn't have money on their Metro cards. And so we started to say, okay, let's put $20 or $10 or $20 on your Metro card to get you a few trips up to a place called Aim Higher, which is up in Northwest Washington. And so people would go, and then there would be great success. Then we heard, I've got a job, but I don't have black pants. So we started to buy black pants. Or I have a construction job, but I need the tools. So we started to buy tools. But we kept on adding transportation money. And then we learned that for just $17.50, someone can go anywhere in our city on the bus for a week. So instead of just adding $10 for a couple of trips, we started to add $17.50. Well, soon our reputation began to grow as the place where if you showed up for a meeting on a Tuesday morning, you could get a bus pass for the whole week. And it grew from just 8 people who were sleeping on our porches to over 60 people who were showing up, and meaning we were on track to spend more than $50,000 a year on bus passes. The person who started the ministry and was leading it believed it was an extraordinary success because we were actively blessing 60-some people with something real and tangible every week. But we were no longer intentionally walking with people out of homelessness. And the original purpose of the ministry had been completely lost. And again, what we were becoming is the bus pass church. I was the bus pass pastor, because all someone had to do was to show up and get the pass. And so we quickly put limits on the funding for the ministry, saying we can't spend tens of thousands of dollars on this ministry. And as soon as that decision was made, some of the leaders left. And then someone said, but my family and I will just fund the ministry. If the church isn't going to fund it, we're just going to fund it. And the offer came from a couple that was central to our turnaround. Active leaders for whom I will always owe a debt of gratitude. But when the governing board of the church says no to something, only to have a member or a family say, we'll just fund it on our own, it's no longer a ministry of the church. And so the ministry is no more, but also that couple is no longer active in our congregation. So what might happen then if we sought to evaluate ministry at every single step of the way? Asking about every ministry of all of our churches. What's the purpose of this ministry? How many people are being served within the ministry or by the ministry? Is the ministry staying within budget? And is the ministry making disciples of Jesus Christ for the transformation of the world? One of our signature ministries prior to the pandemic was a shower ministry where people could come inside and receive clean underwear, clean socks, toiletries, and a shower prior to going to work. It was something that I had imagined a long time ago, and then we started it, and we started it with just one morning a week after discerning best practices from other congregations. And then it continued to grow until it was open 3 mornings a week. And then we didn't have enough volunteers. And so it went back to 2 mornings a week. And it's been transformational. Partnerships have been formed with different hotels where we get toiletries, we get all of our baked goods from a hotel. But we've been struggling to get enough people to really be committed to it in order to follow the policies that we set for the ministry to be safe. But we couldn't stop or pause the ministry on our own because we pride ourselves on never closing it when it's advertised to be open, not even on Christmas or Thanksgiving. It's only the pandemic that could have paused it, as we don't know when it's going to be safe for people to crowd inside a smaller space again. So right now, what we're trying to do is to figure out, does this ministry still have our name on it? What other ministries have emerged? And what is the best investment of $20,000 if we really are trying to move people out of homelessness and into housing? When we wrote A New Day in the City, there's a whole chapter on pruning. And we write about the practice of adaptive leadership, which was written by Ron Heifetz. And Heifetz says, unlike known or routine problem solving for which past ways of thinking, relating, and operating are sufficient for achieving good outcomes, adaptive work demands three very tough human tasks. Figure out how to conserve from past practices, figure out what to discard from past practices, and invent new ways that build from the best of the past. If you are a lectionary preacher or go to a church whose pastor follows the lectionary, then you know that this past Sunday we were reminded that the practice of pruning is also biblical, that Jesus said, I am the true vine and my Father is the vineyard keeper, and that God removes every branch that doesn't produce fruit and trims any branch that produces fruit. But we also know, and if you've heard me speak on pruning before, you know that I am a fan of petunias because I think that they are the best experiment to remind us how critically it is to always be pulling dead things off of things that we are trying to keep alive. So if you grow a petunia, you have to prune it every single day. Almost every single day that you walk by it, you literally have to pluck off anything that is starting to decay. And if you don't pluck it off, then your plant that might be as alive as it is on the right is soon going to look what it looks like on the left. So we know that these things are biblical, and yet we have such a hard time letting go of things that are zapping our energy, zapping our resources, and not leading to life in our congregations, even though we desperately, desperately want and need our congregations to grow. Ray Drummond, who's otherwise known as the Pioneer Woman, put together an extraordinary video that I came across several years ago. And she writes, and I'll show you the video here in a minute, but the first pasture wasn't burned this year. So it's the one that you see right now. And she's going to take us across the road, but you can see the fresh spring grass has started to grow, but it's having to fight off the old stuff for space. And the second pasture was burned in late March, and it's growing back thick and lush. We don't burn every pasture on the ranch every year. It's a cycle. So I always love these moments when the difference is stark. So look, this is the one that wasn't burned at all, where the fresh grass is having to fight its way. And then she's going to allow us to go across the street to see the one that was completely burned. And so that's the pasture that was completely burned. By no means am I suggesting that we burn anything, but it's a powerful reminder of what might happen. So I want to invite you to take out a piece of paper. And we're going to spend 5 minutes making an inventory of our church's ministry. And the invitation is on your piece of paper to write down everything that you can think of that your church or your congregation was doing in January or February of 2020, before the pandemic began. And then I want to invite you to make a list of everything your congregation is doing now in May of 2021. And then go back and put a star by each ministry or activity on either list that you really believe is at the heart of who you are as a congregation. So we'll take 5 minutes to do an inventory. Some of you may still be working on your list, and your memory may continue to be jogged, but I want to now invite you to look at your list again and to make a mark by anything that your church is doing. That is it being duplicated? Is it being duplicated within your church? So are 2 groups in your church trying to do the same thing? Or is it being duplicated in the community? Then I want you to make a mark. What were you doing at the start of 2020 that you are no longer doing and probably doesn't need to return? What have you started doing that you believe should continue whenever herd immunity is reached, if we get there? What on the list of what you are currently doing is really transforming lives in your community? And I believe community can be defined as both all of the people who are part of our church right now and all of the people who we might consider our neighbors or people who live in the same geographical area. And then what can you imagine being very difficult to let go of? And is the reason that it might be difficult to let go of because the ministry truly is making a difference in people's lives? Or because you're afraid to disrupt the boat and upset people? So I'm going to give you a few minutes to make those marks on your list, to go through and evaluate your list. I wonder if anyone would like to share some of your observations so far. What are you gleaning from your lists? Would anyone like to share with the group? I can't see all of you, so you might just want to unmute yourself and talk, if you can.
I can talk. Can I say, I have my church, I have 2 churches, but they're both very similar. And all of the celebrations, I listed all of the celebrations that we used to do that we had to stop because of the pandemic. And we have a food pantry, a working food pantry that I think we may have to let go because we can't get a chairperson to do it anymore. The older ones have passed on, can't do it anymore. And now those who are able to do it don't have time to do it. And this is a service to the community that we were very proud of. But I'm very sad that I'm thinking that if on our next meeting to talk about it, we're not going to get anyone that wants to chair this any longer. And that was our community service piece. What we're doing right now, we're still closed because we have a lot of elderly and we want to make them safe when we open again. So we're not quick to open. We're talking about it now. But what we have been doing throughout this pandemic has been cleaning churches because people don't clean up. We don't store right. We don't organize right. We don't have secretaries that keep our records and things like that. And so a lot of stuff we've had to prune just cleaning up. We've had like 50 years of stuff that we just stacked in corners and not clean and just, we come to church, we go home. And so right now we're still cleaning, but we're also trying to figure out how we can live stream. We're pushed into the virtual technology now. How can we get into YouTube and Facebook and all of those things? And so church is going to be very different for us when we do open.
Yeah. Thank you for sharing. It's painful as our congregations change and as some of the people who have been holding or carrying the bucket for so longer are no longer able to do it. It can be very painful. Would one other person like to share? And again, I can't see all of you, so if you just want to unmute and talk if you'd like to.
So much of what we're doing or have done in the past has been happening because of habit. Mm-hmm. And that habit has been interrupted. And there is opportunity, but there is also a real need to create space for the mourning and for the recognition of what good work has been done in the past and how something else might take the place of that.
Yeah, thank you for that, Laura. The honoring, and especially the honoring of people who have offered so much. Same with the food pantry. Those people who have offered so much to that. How do we honor? The church doesn't always do a good job of saying thank you or expressing gratitude, whether it's financial gifts or gifts of time and talent. But how do we honor it and give thanks for the season and then move forward? Those are important questions as well. Anyone else?
I also am looking at the fact that we may see that there needs to be change, but the fear of disrupting the boat and worrying about how folk will feel instead of looking but can see possibilities if the change happens, but still staying comfortable.
Yeah, Denise, it's so scary to disrupt the boat. It's very scary. And it's a chance, right? I mean, going back to the children's book, we sometimes don't know what might be out there if we don't take the chance as well.
Donna, I think one of the, at Severn Park, we've had this morning prayer group that met, through the whole pandemic, like since last March, has been meeting every weekday on Zoom to pray for 30 minutes. And it was led by pastors for the first few months and then taken on by lay leadership. And it's become this like same 12 people logging on every single day. And so the lay person who's been leading it for a year at our church is ready to be done having a 5-day-a-week commitment on Zoom. But there's nobody willing to take it on. And I've seen kind of a mixture of like the different members of that group would answer these questions differently if they were doing this. Some of them have said to me, we're back in person now. I feel like we can let go of this and be thankful for what it was. And some of them have said, you guys, you have to keep showing up or else this group is going to fall apart, and are kind of guilting them to stay. And so it's just funny how like the same thing, it served a purpose during the pandemic, but I don't know. I don't know where this is going to go. But it's funny to me how quickly it's become the thing that to hold on to.
Yeah, and I think too, Kara, what you just said about one of my deep prayers right now is, and fear, and I don't want to say fears, but I'm deeply aware of the challenge on the horizon that the people who were actively and faithfully serving a year ago or before we moved outside of the building may not necessarily come back. And everyone is on such a different trajectory in terms of levels of comfort with coming back. But I've also had people say to me how the pandemic has helped them to see where they really want to invest their time and where they don't want to invest their time, and how they really want to make sure that they're investing their time in something that truly matters. 2 weeks ago, I participated in the Art of Hospitality with the United Methodist Church of the Resurrection. And Church of the Resurrection is known for their hospitality. They have hundreds of volunteers who welcome that extraordinarily large congregation. And to hear Church of the Resurrection people, leadership say that they're struggling with volunteer recruitment was incredibly comforting, and a wake-up call in terms of but I am also fully aware that if we don't have the people to carry it, then we have to let go of it, and then see what emerges. And then some of those 12, you said 10 or 12 people who are participating, I wonder if 6 weeks without it would make one of them realize how much they miss it, that they're willing to step back up and pick it back up again. Anytime Church of the Resurrection says they're struggling with something, I'm so thankful. It's just so assuring when a massive church says, no, we're struggling too. It's such a gift. We ask a series of questions in A New Day in the City. How much of our church buildings and its contents do we love for our sake instead of God's sake? How much of what we do is really for God's sake, and how much of it is for our sake? What traditions do we love that have everything to do with our own personal preferences or our traditions or our habits, and have nothing to do with Jesus's efforts to change and transform the world? And this fourth question continues to haunt me. What would we do if we were only working for Christ's sake? So what might you need to pause or discard? This is literally how one of our closets looks upstairs. And again, we moved out of our building and put everything in storage, which means that someone thought that we would still come back and use all of these things, including a sign that says, please do not throw rice on the steps. But how many of you have been to a wedding in the last, have you had rice at a wedding lately? Throw it on a step? No. But we thought that we might need this someday. And so we packed it away and paid for it to be stored and brought it back. Same with the candelabras. I think we should keep all those little crosses. And then, we haven't filled communion trays like that forever. And we're certainly not going to stuff a communion tray full like that for a long time with the pandemic. But we couldn't imagine letting go of these things. What is it that we need to pause or discard, both in our closets as well as on our calendars? And then Thomas Merton has one of my favorite quotes. Everything you love for its own sake, outside of God alone, blinds your intellect and destroys your judgment of moral values. It vitiates your choice so that you cannot clearly distinguish good from evil, and you do not truly know God's will. Again, what do we love for our own sake, but not for God's sake? So one of our greatest challenges right now is figuring out, how do we use our facility? How do we use our property? Our property was built 12 years ago in partnership with Wesley. Wesley's no longer using this space. They have a space where students live on the market. And so the original hope and dream for this facility has changed significantly. And we are well aware of that if we don't continue to build significant partnerships and be really wise stewards of this facility, that we too could be one of those 100,000 churches that's projected to be closed in the next 5 to 10 years. I don't think any of us can take anything for granted right now, whether we're a large church, a medium-sized church, or a small church, that none of us can take anything for granted. And the article, I found an article on an organization site called Governing. It's the Governing website. And it's an article that says churches are closing and it's a challenge for local governments. And it talks about what local governments are going to be doing with all of these empty buildings They also point out the research that was in the March just 2 months ago, the Gallup poll, how less than half of Americans, for the very first time, less than half of Americans are now church growers. And that statistic is down 70% since 2000. So down 70%. Church membership, church going is down 70% in just 21 years, just in the turn of the century. And yeah, I still think about, partying like it's 1999 when we took very little for granted. But my goodness, think about how much can happen in the next 10 years and in the next 20 years. And I think all of us are going to be called to figure out how are we good stewards of our property and how are we developing partnerships with people who can help us sustain our properties no matter where we are. So my next invitation for us, and our leadership team just did this one as well, but if you'll take out another piece of paper and put 2 columns on it and write on one column all of the ways that your building or buildings, your church's property, your space, how is it an asset? And how is it a hindrance? If you want to write blessing or curse, you can do that too. However you want to write it. How is your building a blessing? How is your build or an asset? How is your building a hindrance or a headache? Don't write how is it a headache. How does it prevent you from doing everything that you'd like to do? Anyone want to share what's emerging for you? Is your asset more of a blessing? Or is your building more of a blessing, or is your building a challenge?
I can say our building is a challenge because we don't have adequate parking space, because we have more cemetery space than a space to do anything that's really good.
Thank you.
Our building is a blessing and a challenge. We do have parking spaces, but the property needs fencing on all sides. What's there is an old chain link fence. We need signage to show that we are indeed a church, something that can be seen from the busy main avenue. And it needs refurbishing and significant renovations for us to go back in. We're effective. The community knows that we're there, but we need. It is a blessing and a challenge at the same time.
Thank you.
Reverend Donna,
Yes.
I think that our building is beautiful and a beautiful spiritual place, but that it can be a hindrance if we think that if we're too wedded to the idea that we can only be doing God's work within the building, that everyone has to go to the building to do God's work.
Thank you for that too. And I think that's one of our great takeaways as a congregation from this time. Like, we are so eager. We got to the place where the bulk of our ministry was happening inside of our building, and especially with our shower ministry, with that being our signature ministry, that one of our biggest takeaways is how eager we are to be more embodied in the larger community instead of inviting everyone to come to us. There was also John Buchanan, who's the editor of the Christian Century, wrote an article a few weeks ago talking about the need for sacred space. And especially after the pandemic, that there are going to be significant numbers of people who are longing to be inside of beauty and to be inside of sacred space. And so I'm curious to see if that prediction comes through as well. But also, what are some of the partnerships that we can develop? We have nonprofits that are getting smaller and smaller all around us in many of our communities. How is it that we can share office space How is it that we can be creative with our space? Jim Griffith was my clergy coach when I first got to Mount Vernon Place. And Jim is very, very quick to say that congregations should never, ever give away space. That whenever you give away space, you're actually subsidizing that organization and basically saying that you believe that that organization's work is more important than your church's work, or just as important as your church's work. So to never ever subsidize, to never ever subsidize a ministry by giving, or an organization by giving away space, but yet seeing that vital partnerships are what can enable us to be really extraordinary stewards of the property that we have. There's also an organization that's doing some really unique things with property. It's called Rooted Good, and the website is just rootedgood.org. They already have something in place that's already started called the Oikos Accelerator, where they're helping congregations use their property. But it might be, that program has already started, but that might also be a resource that you want to check out. And then the formal evaluation process, all of you should have received, or hopefully received in advance, a sample of our evaluation that we've been using at Mount Vernon Place the last 3 years. If you don't yet have it, we can make sure that you get it, because we're going to get ready to break into some groups within our individual congregations or other small groups. And to go through this evaluation, but to also really ponder, if you were to create a formal evaluation process for your church, or to enhance one that you already have in light of the pandemic, what are some of those questions that you want to ask? What would be your definition of what it means to be doing good? What is that? What is that bar that you want to set? And we're going to break into a small group so that you can think about what would be helpful, which of these questions might resonate in your setting, which ones would not, what questions would need to be added. And we're going to break into a group to do that. And I also just want to share one of the other things that we've been doing at Mount Vernon Place. In 2006, I was here when the congregation got to move out of our building. And I realized what a gift that was, because we had to let go of everything with the exception of the 11 o'clock hour. And so we've been trying to learn as much as we can from this season. We're still outside of our building as well. And so we've been walking through a Reimagining MVP series and trying to think about what is it that we can learn in this season of multiple pandemics, not just the pandemic of COVID-19, but the pandemic of racism and racial reckoning, the pandemic of what is a mental health crisis, the pandemic of an economic upheaval. What is it that we want to learn as a congregation during this season, and where is God calling us as we move forward? So we're actually thinking about not relaunching, but literally launching, that we are launching into a whole new season. And so we've been inviting different thought partners to come in and be in conversation with us. And one of the gifts is the pandemic is that you can have a guest speaker. Like we had Peter Story with us from Cape Town. You can have a guest speaker with you from anywhere, literally around God's great big world on a Sunday afternoon in Zoom. So we started with another way and really thinking about vocation and doing the work our souls must have as a congregation as well as individuals. Then we continue to do one in December with Peter Story, who was a leader in the church in South Africa during apartheid. He helped us walk through and think about reimagining MVP after the presidential election. We then had Aaron Hawkins, who's the former general secretary of the Commission on Religion and Race, to walk with us on reimagining racial justice. We did one on reimagining relationships and ministry with, not ministry to, but ministry with our neighbor, with a pastor out of Alabama. We have one coming up on hospitality, and then we're also thinking about service, creation, care, evangelism, and then reimagining our space and our property. So what are some of those spaces or broader topics that might be helpful for you to reimagine, to not just assume that you're going to continue to think the way that you thought in May or in February of 2020 and right now, But what are some of those conversations that you might have too, as we really are taking advantage of this time to reimagine? So we're now going to get ready to send you out into small groups.
If you
And
could stop sharing for a second when
oh,
you're
yeah, sorry,
when
Bill.
we're ready. It's okay.
Oh, you want me? Okay.
We'll put this back up. I just want to give some instructions.
Okay. So we're going to walk through, if you want to share what stands out to you from some of your lists that we've been creating during this time. What do you imagine really does need to be completely paused, even, or paused a bit longer, or discarded? And then what might need to be included in an evaluation if you were constantly trying to discern what is effective and what's working in your church? And then what do you want or need to reimagine? And we're going to go into small groups for about 30 minutes, which you can start with a bathroom break. And then we'll come back at 11:50, and Bill's going to give us instructions for those.
If you did not get the evaluation tool, it's in the chat. Just open the chat. You can click and download the evaluation tool if you did not get it previous to today. We have done our very best that if you are with somebody from your church, that you're in the same group together. If for some reason that didn't work out, don't worry. We can rearrange you. But we, doing all this on the fly. So we're going to give this a shot. We're going to open the rooms. You will see on your screen, it will say join. You need to click the join button to go to your room. So what every parent likes to say, go to your room.
Any closing questions or comments?
Thank you so much for this ministry self-evaluation. This is really, really good. So we'll definitely use this. Thank you.
You're welcome. I'm glad it's helpful. Our lay people put it together, and I'm glad it's helpful.
Yes, we at Hope Hill United Methodist Church, on behalf of Pastor Dave Fawcett as well, we want to thank you all for the ministry self-evaluation as well. It has helped us to reimagine, rethink the process of our missionary team and how we perform our missionary work.
Good. I'm really thankful.
Thank you.
Any questions?
Well, Donna, I just want to say thank you on behalf of Jones UMC. We have used bits and pieces. I love your book, and this has helped us. I was appointed during the pandemic, and so I haven't been there a full year yet. And I went in with an inventory in hand to evaluate everything upon arrival. So I just want to thank you and pray God's blessing upon you, your ministry, and your congregation.
Carrie, thank you. Bless you. Thank you.
I also like to thank you so much for that. We had started in one of my churches with some of those hard questions I put before them, and now this evaluation tool, and to also know that it wasn't just made up by the pastor, but the laity helped do it. And so we can really come up with what does good really mean. Thank you so much.
Thank you.
And I like to say also the fact that some of our missions ministry began during the pandemic. So this is another tool which can enable us to be more efficient and yes, to analyze ourselves, because you can think that you're doing very well, but not really doing very well until you evaluate. And then see where everything is and where everything lines up. And so what you're providing us helps us to really to look at ourselves, see how we can be more efficient at it, and make those adjustments. So that's really great. Thank you.
Good. Thank you, Pastor David. Yeah, please use as much as you want. Before you all came on, we were having a conversation too with Dr. Smothers. And just picking back up on this season of not knowing who's going to re-engage with ministry or having a hard time getting people to say yes. And I was sharing that one of the things that the Church of the Resurrection really highlighted as part of the small group or the training I did on the art of hospitality was how everything right now has to begin with a why. So we cannot simply say we need greeters. But instead of saying we need greeters, we might say, Imagine who's in our neighborhood right now. Imagine how many people have lost a loved one in the last 14 months. Imagine how many people have sent out 76 resumes and still don't have a job. Imagine how many people are experiencing a mental health crisis and know depression, not because of something that they have heard, but because of something that has taken root in the depth of their being. Imagine a marriage that's ended. We all watched the Gates marriage end yesterday, all across our televisions. Imagine whose marriage is ended because people have spent too much time together during the pandemic. And now imagine if any of those people show up at our door. What do we want them to experience the moment that they walk in? And now will you help me greet them? Will you help me do whatever you can to embody the deep, all-encompassing, never-ending love of God? So then how do we keep teaching and to accept every single opportunity as an opportunity to teach, and then the opportunity to identify who can help us and equip them for that task? Andy Oliver is a friend of mine who pastors a church it's called Allendale United Methodist in Florida. And it was a church that had very little life left. It's in St. Petersburg, Florida. And Andy just came in and said, like, this church has very little life left, so we're just going to try as much as we can. And I'll never forget the first time I walked into his building, one of the exercises that he had invited his congregation to do is they had great big pieces of paper. And the top of it said, when you walk in this space, we hope you feel. And then he had invited everyone in the congregation to complete that prompt. When you walk into our church, when you walk into our building, when you walk into our sanctuary, we hope you feel ... And then everyone in the congregation had written what they prayed or hoped that people would experience when they walked into into their church. But imagine then people then contributed to that, but then they're also held accountable to that every single time that they walk in there. But then every guest, I was blown away and so touched just by reading what these people had written about what they wanted me to experience as a guest in their church. So I'll offer that. Maybe that is energizing ministry too, because we also are trying to figure out how do we energize our lay people and our volunteers. And even more so when we think about greeting is not going to be for the faint of heart, right? So if you've asked all your people to show up in a mask and someone shows up that doesn't want to wear a mask, that is not for the faint of heart right now. Asking people if they've signed up and they're seeing if they're on their list, that goes against everything that we've been taught in terms of hospitality at the church. But so then how do we help our greeters to see just how critically important this all is? All right, any other closing questions, comments? All right, thank you. And I'm so deeply grateful for every opportunity I have like this to share. And I'm humbled that you have invested 2 hours of time that I know is just really precious right now. So thank you. Thank you for being with us this morning.